Thanks for joining me. We'll be going live in just a minute. We're setting things up here on multiple platforms.
You're tuned in to the Eye on Global Politics radio show, coming at you live from the heart of Oregon's Willamette Valley, broadcasting around the world on eyonglobalpolitics.com. Here's your host for the next hour, Dr. Paul F.J. Aranyas.
All right, thanks for joining me here on October 19th. We're watching the genocide happening in Gaza that needs to stop. The international community needs to do something. It's unbelievable what we're witnessing. It's almost like a dream, like setting, a nightmare that's happening in Gaza. It is a nightmare for the people in Gaza right now, and the West is behind it. The United States is backing it. They released 20 trucks for humanitarian aid. That's not enough. That's not even guaranteed to get there. They need to get fuel in there. They need to get medicine in there. They need to get ceasefire and stop the bombing. And what we have is a pure genocide being backed by the United States and the European Union. And what do you say? What do you say to all these hypocrites? These German hypocrites, these Nazis in Berlin, in the Reichstag, Schultz, and these fools in Paris Macron and these little whimpering fools that are backing genocide, and the UK, these Brits, these colonial Brits, and these genocidal American politicians, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, the Congress, the entire Congress, save a handful of people, are promoting and supporting genocide right now. It doesn't take a genius. You cannot collectively punish an entire population, squeeze them off from basic necessities of survival, food, medicine, fuel. You have hospitals shutting down. Never mind you can't never mind it, but the tragedy of the hospital that got bombed, which is Israel's line, I think. But irrespective of what they want to say and put blame on who did it, Israel has been targeting health facilities all over the Gaza Strip. They have been targeting ambulances all over the Gaza Strip. They have been targeting infrastructure, residential buildings all over the Gaza Strip, one after the other, day after day, dropping 6,000 bombs on the probably more like 7,000 or 8,000 by now on the people of the Gaza Strip. And these people in the West have the audacity to talk about a rules-based order and point their finger at Russia, a conflict which they started, which they lit up. They ignited in 2014 with a coup. They started it. These same people that are backing genocide started a conflict which killed 15,000 people in the Donbass, and then which provoked a reaction from Russia. And did Russia do what Israel's doing? They have the capacity to do it? No, because Russia's not a genocidal, lunatic, terrorist apartheid state, even though all the Western propaganda wanted to make it out like so. No, Israel is a terrorist, genocidal state, and it's showing its colors right now. And you have Joe Biden and Blinken and Sunak and von der Leyen all go up there and put their stamp, their green light stamp on genocide. And that's what it is. That's what it is. Look at the pictures. If you're listening to me on Eye on Global Politics Radio, you can't see them, but look at the pictures that are taking place on Al Jazeera right now. Over and over, all the babies, over 1,000, over 1,300 babies killed. 1,300 babies killed by Israel, and they talk about they're a democracy. They're not a democracy. This is an occupation of a people for 56 years legally, if you want to go by the 1967 borders. Morally, it's a 75-year occupation because they had no right to create that state and just ethnically cleanse people right out of there. But they're there, and you have to deal with the reality of it. And so it's a 56-year occupation according to international law. Never mind that this has been going on for far longer than 75 years. It's been going on for 106 years since the Balfour Declaration. And even before that, when French aristocratic wealthy benefactors went in there and with their money and influence brought in Jewish immigrants to push Palestinians off their land back in the 19th century. And so this is a genocide, an ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity. And what do we have? What do we have? We have the West that's just fine and dandy with it. Fine and dandy with it. And they go so much to say, the ones that want to appear humane, like Macron, want to call for humanitarian pauses or a humanitarian pause of a genocide. Yeah, we need humanity. Gaza will take anything it gets. The civilian population will take humanitarian pauses to stay afloat, to stay alive. But this is, it's saying you want a humanitarian pause of a genocide. The bombing needs to stop. The blockade in its entirety needs to be lifted because it is a crime against humanity. Don't these people read international law? Don't they know international law? I thought they thought international law was somehow mixed up with their quote-unquote rules-based order that they were waving in Russia's face for the last year and a half. What was this rules-based order? It's they can do whatever they want, and if that's genocide, if that's ethnic cleansing, if that's crimes against humanity, that's their rules, then that's their rules-based order. They'll make an excuse to justify it in their mind. It's unjustifiable. It's unjustifiable. You can give me a call at 1-877-871-PAUL. Leave me a voicemail. We're streaming on Iron Global Politics Radio. We're just trying it out on LinkedIn. If it seems to be working on LinkedIn, we don't have an audience there, but we're trying it out, and we're trying it out on Facebook, and we're on YouTube, but primarily going on Iron Global Politics Radio right now, where most of you are listening. What's going on here? Oh man, this is Joe Biden is being called Genocide Joe on Twitter, is trending. And you have some of the most absurd arguments being put out there on social media by people with positions and power, quite frankly. George Galloway says, the more you look, the more you see this is a Western genocide against the Arab people of Palestine. Biden, Sunak, and others are present to dance on the mass graves. The money, the weapons, the propaganda machine are all NATO assets. The paralyzed and terrified parliaments, redolent of the last 18 months over Ukraine. This is another NATO war. Yeah, it's another NATO war. This is a NATO war. And it's funny how they can talk about the right of Israel. I mean, it's tragic that they can talk about the right of Israel for self-defense when it's an occupying power. How does an occupying power that oppresses, dehumanizes, kills, imprisons people year after year, month after month, year after year, and then they talk about the right to self-defense? You know what this is? This is just playing the Holocaust card. How long do they want to live off the Holocaust? 6 million Jews were murdered by Nazi Germany, not the Palestinians. And they want to continually, the Zionists, not Jewish people, we're making a differentiation between Zionism and Judaism, but the Zionists that want to call themselves Jews, the Zionists want to play the victim at all costs, even when they're flattening, carpet bombing Gaza, choking off everyday civilians, babies, mothers, little kids from water, from food, from medicine, from fuel. Cancer hospitals shutting down, not able to do treatment, shutting down the radiology, shutting down other departments. They're on the verge of shutting down completely. The only cancer hospital in Gaza. Ambulances being targeted. And the IDF has such a media machine and propaganda machine that they come out right away with defense for anything. They could line up civilians in rows of 400 and execute them on cameras. They'll come up with some kind of excuse. That's what it is. We're seeing it right. How can these images look like Nagasaki and Hiroshima? The whole neighborhood's destroyed. And you have the Western media and Western politicians for months and months. When an apartment building gets hit, a single apartment building gets hit in a war, and I'm against any civilian deaths. It's all tragic. War is tragic, but they go after Russia like it's evil incarnate, like it's the worst thing they've ever seen in the world. When the United States killed 3 to 4 million people in Vietnam, dropped Agent Orange on their own troops. When the United States dropped napalm, the little girl running down the street with her skin dripping off her from the napalm attack. When the United States killed 1 million people in Iraq. NATO, the French, the Italians, the U.S. bombed Libya in 2011. Little kids being dug out of the rubble, and then they're using their media machine to go after an adversary. And look at their hypocrisy now. Look at it. Look at them. Look at them. Justifying atrocities at every turn. Collateral damage. I heard a major general, forget what his rank is. It was major something. U.S. military on mainstream media, I think it was MSNBC, talking about, no, it was CNN. It was CNN, Anderson Cooper, I believe. And the major said, we can expect tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths, collateral damage. How do you have hundreds of thousands of civilians and call it collateral damage? No, that's a genocide. That's not collateral damage. Collateral damage is when you kill, by accident, tragically, a handful of people or 10 people. I don't pick a smaller number than hundreds of thousands of people are collateral damage. And this is coming from a U.S. military man. A million dead in Iraq, didn't care. They didn't care. Is there a big monument in the United States to the a mea culpa, a monument to say you're sorry to God, to the world, for killing 1 million Iraqis on false pretenses? No weapons of mass destruction, went in there, overturned that country, killed 1 million Iraqis illegally, illegitimately. They should have built not a Freedom Tower in New York. They should have built a monument, a church, a religious monument, asking for God's forgiveness, asking for the world's forgiveness. Instead, they just kept on doing what they're doing. Now they're backing Israel and going into bombing Libya, one after the other after the other. NATO should build a monument to the people they killed in Afghanistan and gave it back to the Taliban, killed tens of thousands of civilians, and shouldn't have gone in there in the first place. If you look at the legal resolutions for both Iraq is obvious. Afghanistan was also illegal. There was no resolution allowing for a military invasion of Afghanistan. It was a general resolution opposing terrorism, which, if on that logic, you could go invade any country. And the legal justifications that the U.S. and NATO and European countries use for the use of force, I wrote a whole book about it, are just absurd many of the times. Absurd. You remember Grenada when they said there were medical students in danger and that it was a Cuban takeover. And the only Cubans that were there that met them were Cuban construction workers at the airport when the U.S. Rangers landed. And the medical students didn't know what was going on. They were studying for final exams. These are professional liars. These are professional liars. The Israelis, the U.S. government, the European Union, the European governments. These are former colonial powers and neo-colonial powers. This doesn't happen. I find it extremely hard to believe that this kind of carnage happens to a bunch of white people. Okay? That they can kill 1 million Iraqis and say, oops, and go on with their lives. That they can kill 3 to 4 million Vietnamese and go, oh, well, that's just, a time period in our history. Never make amends, do the same thing over and over. That they can allow Israel to go and collectively punish a people If there was a terrorist that came from, I don't even want to talk about Hamas because I think it's, Hamas, if you look at the history of Hamas, it was the U.S., it was Israel that pushed up Hamas to try to bring down the power of the PLO. And there's no Hamas in the West Bank. And yet, today, what we have just 3 Palestinians killed today in the West Bank. But there are 225 to 250 Palestinians killed before this attack in the West Bank. There's no Hamas in the West Bank. Okay, you keep, I'm against any civilian casualty, and any civilian casualty, any crime against civilians is not acceptable. There's no justification for that. But you have to look at the root cause of this. And if you leave someone locked up in your basement, and you leave an entire people locked up in your basement, and you abuse them, somebody's going to break out there and commit an atrocity. Okay? It's not a justification for the atrocity, but if you go back and look at the slave revolts in the 19th century, you're going to see slave revolts that broke out and went and massacred white people, their master's family, their master's kids laying in their bed. Is that right? Is there any religious code that justifies that? No. But you have to look at the root cause, the system of violence of slavery that produces this kind of reaction, because not everyone's going to have that reaction. There's going to be some people that are like St. Francis that are going to be whipped and chained and killed and be Christ-like and turn the other cheek. And there's others that are going to snap and have an ideology that we're going to have revenge. We're going to break out of this prison. And in living on earth and living in reality, in the reality of the situation on the ground, you have to address the root cause. And the root cause, in the case of the Israeli-Palestinian issue, is the systemic violence of the occupation. It is a system of violence. You have people that say it's that Hamas or Palestinian violence breaks the calm. But when Israel is killing Palestinians on a daily and weekly basis, for them that's calm. And when the Palestinians react, the calm is broken. The peace has been broken. You don't get to have that kind of world. Inevitably you're going to get a reaction. You're going to get a reaction, and what is happening right now, irrespective of what Hamas did, whatever you want to call it, there were. I don't know if there's proof for some of the allegations that are out there. There's obviously civilians were killed, and anytime a civilian is killed, it is a war crime. It is, if they're targeted, it's a war crime. So Hamas committed war crimes. The Israeli government military is a terrorist state. It is committing war crimes on an unimaginable scale that dwarfs the crimes of Hamas. And you're seeing that unfold before your very eyes. 1,300 children killed so far in this genocidal action by the Israeli government. You cannot go and bomb a densely populated area. And you have Israeli officials that are claiming that it is okay to bomb civilians. They're referring to Palestinians as animals and rats, and collective punishment is a good idea. And the former prime minister, this moron that was on BBC and MSNBC, Naftali Bennett, out there, he was saying, I don't want to hear about Palestinian civilians. But what Naftali Bennett does not understand is that it is the responsibility of the occupying power to take care of the civilians. Palestine is not an independent state. It is under the occupation of Israel. And it is therefore Israel's responsibility that they have food, water, medicine, and that they are not bombed and targeted by the Israeli military. It is the Israelis that are responsible for that. And not only are they failing in that responsibility, but they're actively committing a genocide against the Palestinian people. I'm going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back. Give me a call, 1-877-871-PAUL. We're broadcasting on Eye on Global Politics Radio and streaming on some other platforms.
All aspects, and in terms of fuel, in terms of electricity, water, medical supplies. Now the doctors in the hospitals, they conduct or they stretch the wounds without anesthesia, which has happened in Gaza. It has never happened in the hospitals of the Gaza Strip. Besides other needs that the hospitals need, including medicine and disposables and the fuel to keep the generators operating. Now the hospitals or the medical health system appealed the owners of the fuel station to donate or to bring every liter of fuel that they could have they could have in the past to the hospital to keep these generators operating in order to save the life of the people. Now the health system or the Minister of Health appealed Egypt to open the crossings or specifically Rafah crossing to send this big number of injuries to the Sinai hospitals to receive the proper treatment. Otherwise, according to the Minister of Health, they will die. The Minister of Health added that they found 300 earlier today, 300 bodies of dead people under the rubble of the destroyed houses that they were not able to carry them to or to bring them out of the rubble earlier in the previous days.
And Safwat, talking about the arrival of aid through Rafah, US sources have been saying an agreement has been reached. Any sign of when aid might actually make it through Rafah?
Until now, we have not received any official statement by the related organizations, including the United Nations or the Red Cross one, who are supposed to be in charge of delivering or watching these humanitarian aid. But These news are widespread all over the Gaza Strip. We have been receiving many phone calls from friends and from relatives to check whether these news are true or not. The people received this news positively. We told them that all what we know is that the crossing could be open tomorrow. We learned that the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, is expected to arrive to the Rafah crossing tomorrow to monitor the delivery of the humanitarian aid. Hundreds of tons of the humanitarian aid have been arriving at Al Arish, at the Egyptian side of Rafah crossing, from the beginning, or since the beginning of the Israeli war in Gaza, and from Jordan, from Turkey, from Arab Emirates, and from other countries. And they had been waiting the Israeli approval to let this humanitarian aid in. People received this positively, and they hope that this could be a sign of a future ceasefire, so can people return to their homes, or at least meet the basic needs for their families.
All right. We'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Safwat Al-Kahlout. Well, Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has met his Israeli counterpart in West Jerusalem. Sunak described the Israeli strike on the Al Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza as a watershed moment. He's pushing for humanitarian aid to be delivered to Gaza as soon as possible. Sunak is due to arrive in Saudi Arabia shortly.
We also recognise that the Palestinian people are victims of Hamas too. And that is why I welcome your decision yesterday that you took to ensure that routes into Gaza will be opened for humanitarian aid to enter. I'm glad that you made that decision. We will support it. We're increasing our aid to the region, and we will look to get more support to people as quickly as we can. The last thing for me to close on is this. You describe this as Israel's darkest hour. Well, then it's for me to say I'm proud to stand here with you in Israel's darkest hour. As your friend, we will stand with you in solidarity, we will stand with your people, and we also want you to win.
Al Jazeera's Mohammed Jamjoom is in occupied East Jerusalem, joins us from there. So I understand Rishi Sunak and Benjamin Netanyahu just held a press conference. What did they have to say?
Sami, Rishi Sunak expressed staunch solidarity with Israel. He also reiterated the UK's position that Israel has the right to defend itself. But he said that that should be done in line with international law. It's interesting because while he said that, he did not address the fact that Israel has cut off fuel, food, and water to the Gaza Strip. Many people would consider that to be in breach of international law. Now, in that presser, he also said that Israel has gone through something that no country, no people should have to endure. Mr. Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, said in that presser, this is our darkest hour. That means that this is a long war and we'll need your continuous support, clearly indicating that Netanyahu is aware of the fact that Israel will continue to face a lot of international criticism in the days to come, and that he wants to make sure that the support that he has seen from Western leaders like Sunak, like U.S. President Joe Biden, that will continue, that will not melt away. Now, Sunak also talked about the importance of having humanitarian aid delivered into Gaza. He also reiterated the fact that Britain would like to see its nationals, those dual citizens that are stuck in Gaza, that he would like them to be able to cross from the Rafah crossing into Egypt. And we also heard from Netanyahu and Sunak that they need to try and prevent any regional escalation in the conflict. Sami?
Now, Mohammed, at the same time as there's a lot of talk about getting aid in, the question is, did Rishi Sunak get any guarantees? Are the Israelis giving any guarantees that the airstrikes will stop, well, at least while the aid's being delivered?
Well, Sami, nothing along those lines was stated publicly, but it seems that it's fairly certain that Sunak and that President Biden and that others would have put pressure or are putting pressure on Netanyahu and other officials in Israel to ensure that while aid is being delivered, airstrikes are not continuing to be carried out on the Gaza Strip. This is something that these Western leaders are very worried about. They want to continue to stress that aid should be delivered. They don't want to see airstrikes happening. They certainly don't want to see any aid convoys potentially targeted by Israel as they might be attempting to deliver aid, because they are also keenly aware that there is mounting pressure on them from many people in their public, in their countries, as far as what's going on in Gaza. So right now, no public indication that Israel has agreed not to strike the Gaza Strip while aid is being delivered. But there's a lot of other questions right now, too. Many estimate that the earliest any aid could be delivered into Gaza would be tomorrow. And it's unclear yet if that is actually a realistic expectation at this point. Sami?
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Mohammed Jamjoom. Well, earlier I spoke to the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan Nahum. I began by asking her if she condemned the killing of 7 children in an Israeli airstrike.
I think any child that dies in the process of war is tragic. They didn't do anything. But I feel very, very aggrieved at the 200 hostages that Hamas have who are victims of a war crime. One thing is war, and things happen not purposefully. The Israeli army does not target Palestinian children. Unfortunately, Hamas uses them as human shields and puts them in strategic places so that they can say, look what the Israelis did. But Hamas, the terrorist genocidal group run by Iran, they actually purposely target children and women, raping women, beheading babies. And let me tell you what we found today, an autistic 14-year-old
I do have to jump in. I'm sorry, I do need to jump in because you haven't answered the question, Fleur. I didn't ask you about what Hamas is doing. Let me repeat. I'm not asking you whether it's tragic. Let me just. This is how an interview works, Fleur. Let me pose the question to you, please. Do you condemn the Israeli military's killing of 7 children of the al-Bakri family? I'm not asking you if you think it's tragic. I'm not asking you how you feel about Hamas's attacks. We have condemned, and I've given very hard interviews on October the 8th to Hamas officials, but I'm asking you to answer the question. Do you condemn the killing of 7 children, yes or no?
I think it's tragic that 7 children died today. It doesn't matter who they are, whether they're Palestinian or Israeli.
So
yes.
Viewers will notice, Fleur, that you are not condemning the Israeli military's killing of 7 children. How would you respond to those who say, well, let me finish the question, Fleur. Let me finish the question. How would you? No, I haven't finished the question. Please, this is how a conversation works. How would you respond to those who will say that by failing to condemn what international... Let me read to you a statement by Amnesty International concerning the killings of children. It says on October the 19th, it's saying, OK, we'll come to whether they're neutral or not. They're saying, quote, they're concerned about violations of international humanitarian law by Israeli forces in Gaza. They go on to reference airstrikes, pounding residential buildings, killing children. They are blaming Israeli forces, not Hamas, not human shields, for killing Israeli children, Palestinian children. By not recognizing that, how do you respond to those who say you're not giving the same value to Palestinian babies and children as you are to Israelis?
That's not true. And let me tell you what the difference is. When you're condemning means that somebody went and purposefully did something. The Israeli army does not purposely go to kill children. Unfortunately, children and adults and all people can be the casualties of war. There's a difference between being a casualty of war, which is tragic, and going and purposefully targeting children. And that I would condemn whoever did that.
Israeli forces have killed 9 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank on Thursday. The military raided multiple locations, including Nur Shams refugee camp in Tulkarm. At least 74 Palestinians have now been killed since October. Nidal reports from Ramallah.
For the first time in years,
Okay, you're hearing that Israeli spokeswoman. I didn't catch where she's from, what ministry or what organization in the Israeli government she is, but she's completely wrong. She doesn't get that when you bomb a densely populated area that you know for certain that you're going to kill civilians, that you know for certain that this disproportionate response is going to massacre hundreds and hundreds, possibly thousands, it's up to 1,500 children right now, then you have a responsibility not to. Because there's not just one way to, let's break this down. If you're going after say you're going after a terrorist group or a criminal enterprise, and they're within a civilian population, they're in the city of New York, do you choke off New York from food, water, medical supplies, and bomb them flat? There are many ways. Israel has complete control over the Gaza Strip. They can wait it out and go in with special forces. I don't think Israel is very good at fighting on the ground, quite frankly. I think their modus operandi is killing civilians, shooting teenagers with rocks. But you have a variety of options other than just going in and carpet bombing civilian neighborhoods and saying, oops, we killed 1,500 children. Knowing that the actual goal of Israel right now is not to kill Hamas. That's not the ultimate goal. That's the excuse. The ultimate goal is to drive all those Palestinians in the Gaza out and ethnically cleanse them, whether it's into southern Gaza for starters or into the Sinai and take over Gaza and make it build hotels, make it drive them out completely and never let them back. A second Nakba. That's the goal here. And you can see that. You can see that. Anybody with you don't carry this kind of ethnic cleansing genocidal policy out if you want to try to take out a quote unquote terrorist group, a quote unquote violent group that you're afraid will carry out attacks on your soil. Because by killing so many civilians, what you're doing is creating so much animosity toward the state of Israel, not only in Gaza, but around the region, around the world, that you've just been the poster recruitment boy for Hamas or for any other organization that wants violent militant action against Israel. They're massacring children, women, children, at a rate that's unfathomable. They're choking off civilians. It's not just the bombing that's killing. It's the infection without medicine. People are going to be dying from, if not already, dying from infection, dying from lack of medical care. The dialysis patients, the diabetic patients, the cancer patients, the people with heart conditions, you name it. People with asthma, being choked off without medicine, without water, without food. People are dying from all sorts of reasons. They're drinking right now, according to international organizations. I believe it was UNICEF. There was multiple. There was the Associated Press, Reuters, the Telegraph. They were all reporting on, the Independent were reporting on it. The people are now drinking seawater and contaminated, dirty, polluted water to survive. How long can you survive on that? And what are the health consequences? Look at all the dust. That's the air, the pollution in the air that Israel's created. People are going to have all kinds of, if they survive this, they're going to have all kinds of lung problems and lung issues. Look what happened to the workers at 9/11 and the 9/11 rescue workers. Many of them died from lung-related cancer or lung-related diseases because of the the pollution, the chemicals, asbestos, things in the air that got in their lungs, the particles that got in their lungs. There's a whole host of issues that are coming, never mind the ever-present mental trauma that they're inflicting upon a whole generation. And that's exactly what they're committing, a genocide against the people. You can't just look. The bombing is horrible. It is immediate, and it is right in your face. There are numerous other causes that are going to cause casualties in the immediate short-term future and the medium-term future and the long-term future. They're going to die from all kinds of health-related issues. You can't choke a population off that was already suffering from a blockade, that was already suffering from a brutal and inhumane blockade for 17 years, 16, 17, 17, 18, 17 years. And then put a full siege on a civilian population, as Vladimir Putin said, like a Leningrad type siege that the Nazis did on Leningrad. And not call it genocide. It is a genocide. It's a genocide, and it's inhumane. And every person that stands for any fundamental human rights, any semblance of human rights and moral decency should be yelling from the rooftops at the Western governments that are facilitating this. The Israeli government is incorrigible. It is a criminal enterprise. It is a terrorist state. And we know the U.S. government and European governments have conducted state terrorism and killing people all over this world with their wars of imperialism. But if you have any hope that there is a redeeming value in your government in the Western capital, that you don't want to go full-blown genocide, supporting genocide, then you need to be screaming from the rooftops right now. If you have any hope in your government, otherwise, just if you're a good meaning person, throw up your arms and say, you know what, these governments are so backwards and filthy and evil and decrepit morally that you can't do anything. But if you have an ounce of hope that the U.S. government, that the British government, that the French government, that the European Union can do something for humanity and do something right, then you better be screaming from the rooftops if you're a morally inclined person, because right now they are facilitating a real live genocide. Crimes against humanity, a genocide, and ethnic cleansing. And I don't use those terms lightly. Those are legal terms. Those are legal terms, and it is not just my streaming on social media and on our Eye on Global Politics radio platform saying these things. This is as a legal international relations scholar, this is my professional academic opinion and the opinion of many people in the field of international law and human rights. And it's not difficult to see. It is clear. It is clear by the statements coming out of the Israeli government, by some of their ministers. It is clear by their actions, their bombing campaign, and their siege on the civilian population of Gaza. It's clear. It's clear. So the question right now is to people in the West, do you want to be associated with genocide unfolding right now? Do you want to be associated with genocide? And if you shrug your shoulders and don't care, then ask yourself, if those were white people, if those were Swedish people being choked off and dying in hospitals and being bombed and being choked off from food and medicine and water, choked off from water, water. No water. If those were Swedish people, would you care? If you don't care now. You sure cared about Ukraine, which paled in comparison. It's not even close. It's a war. It's a war. But Russia did not act like this, despite all the media propaganda. And there are civilian casualties in that war like any war. And it's a bloody war that hundreds of thousands of soldiers are dying. But Russia has the capacity to do what Israel did, and it wouldn't do that. And it doesn't do that, and it hasn't done that. And you can see that by the exclamations of horror when an apartment building and 10 people get killed, or 3 people, or a maternity hospital that supposedly got hit that was called into question later by the woman that was in the maternity hospital, said actually no, it was Ukrainian Azov battalion. It was not a Russian strike, or it hit in the courtyard or whatever. There was a lot of pushback on that. And yet when you have 1,500 children being massacred, people drinking dirty water before your very eyes on international television screens, and you shrug your shoulders and you make an excuse about, oh, gotta go after Hamas. Got to go after Hamas. Got to kill all these children because you got to go after Hamas. Then people who say that there's some sick individuals out there. You're some sick cretins, sick puppies out there, and these sick puppies, unfortunately, are running governments in the West. Schultz, Macron, Sunak, Biden, Kamala Harris, the U.S. Congress, save a handful, von der Leyen, Charles, what's his name, Michel. These are former colonial countries. Do you notice that almost every country that really is on the forefront of supporting Israel came about as a colonial settler country that came about through colonialism and a settler colonial country? Australia, the United States, wiping out the Native Americans, settling the land. People were already there. Canada. And of course, Britain is the flagship of colonialism. And France is the flagship of colonialism in history, going around civilizing the savages and taking over their land.
A Palestinian refugee camp is under Israeli curfew. A raid that began in the early hours of Thursday in Nur Shams near Tul Karim in the north of the occupied West Bank is showing no signs of ending. Israeli forces have declared the area a closed military zone, bulldozing roads, cutting off water and electricity, and turning homes into military posts. This video was filmed in the first hours of the raid. 16-year-old Taha Hamid is shot. His father tries to help him. He too is shot. The father was evacuated. The son bled to death. The Palestinian Red Crescent told Al Jazeera it took paramedics more than 90 minutes to get to Taha, but it was too late.
They're making our job harder. We still can't get into the injured people inside the camp, including children.
Nur Shams refugee camp houses dozens of Palestinian fighters and is regularly targeted by Israeli forces searching for armed groups. But the majority of Palestinians are unarmed. Israeli forces exchange fire with some fighters. Israeli army radio said it targeted a group of fighters with a drone. Palestinians have been killed as a result.
The refugee camp has been undergoing a tough campaign by the Israeli forces. For months now, they've been damaging the infrastructure, arresting people, raiding homes and destroying roads, which increases people's suffering.
More than 120 Palestinians have been arrested in raids across the occupied West Bank, killing and injuring several others.
Palestinians here say they're united in grief with Gaza. 2 funeral processions are making their way through the streets of Ramallah. One is for a 21-year-old Palestinian who has been killed by an Israeli settler after attacking his village. The other is for a 32-year-old Palestinian who was killed in confrontations with Israeli forces.
Arrests too have soared since the beginning of this escalation. The Prisoners' Society says Israeli forces have detained at least 850 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. People here say it's bringing back painful memories of the Second Intifada, when Israelis invaded the occupied West Bank in the early 2000s. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera, Ramallah, the occupied West Bank.
Many Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem say they've been staying home since the war on Gaza began. Israeli officials have increased checkpoints across the city and some fear arrest if they venture out. Sarah Khairat has this report from the Old City.
I didn't do anything. You asked me for my ID, I showed you my ID.
This is what it's like for Palestinians in Israeli-occupied territories every day of the year. Arbitrary security checks, a daily ordeal, especially for young Palestinian men. But since Hamas's attack on Israelis in the start of the war on Gaza earlier this month, Palestinian movement has been restricted around occupied East Jerusalem.
No photo. No photo.
Palestinians say they're not going out unless they have to avoid arrests, checkpoints and harassment from angry Israelis.
We are careful not to move at night. And the market here at 5 o'clock close, and the movement is very minimal. And even the movements around in Jerusalem and around is minimal also, because the people are staying at home, afraid of, what might happen to them. Especially we are under military act.
Shaken up from an earlier incident with what she describes as an aggressive Israeli police officer, this mother of 7 says she's running errands herself to avoid her family members leaving home.
There is no safety, not for the children, not for the youth, not for the elderly. I'm afraid it will get even worse.
The Old City is usually bustling at this time of the year with the smell of incense and spices in the air. But the tourists have gone, and so have all the pilgrims that would normally be here to visit the holy sites. Now, since the attack by Hamas and the war on Gaza, locals living here now say that they fear for their safety and what's yet to come. Adnan Saeed tells us he feels the situation has worsened for Palestinians already. On Sunday, he was chased by a large group of Israeli settlers while on his way to work at an Israeli supermarket. He says it was the first time that this has ever happened to him.
An Israeli settler shouted, "You're an Arab, an Arab." I ignored him, but he followed me. Then I ran and a group of other settlers chased me. A security guard came over shouting while pointing a gun at my face and forced me to the ground. It was discrimination only because I'm Palestinian.
Adnan says just a few days before this incident, he was also surrounded by a group of Israeli forces during a stop check while in his car before finally being let go. Israeli forces have killed at least 5 Palestinians and made more than 100 arrests in occupied East Jerusalem in less than 2 weeks. And with far-right groups calling on Israelis to attack Palestinians they come across, regardless of age, Palestinians are worried that they'll be collectively punished more than they already have been. Sarah Khairat, Al Jazeera, occupied East Jerusalem.
Well, there have been protests around the world in support of the Palestinian people. People in the Philippines have condemned Israel's strike on Al Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza. Crowds held a candlelight vigil in the capital, Manila. Demonstrations also took place in the cities of Quezon and Marawi. South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, has long supported the Palestinians. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said Israel's action in Gaza amounted to almost genocide. His comments come as international pressure for a humanitarian corridor into Gaza grows. Famida Miller has more from Johannesburg.
Since the outbreak of the war on Gaza, several protests supporting Palestinians have been held in the South African cities of Johannesburg and Cape Town, where the grandson of anti-apartheid icon and former President Nelson Mandela voiced his support.
Palestinians are counting on each and every one of us to stand and be counted like they stood side by side with us.
The governing African National Congress, credited with liberating South Africa from an apartheid regime, has for decades supported a two-state solution and a free Palestine. The Palestine Liberation Organization supported the ANC during its years in exile and Mandela's time in prison. While the government here has expressed regret at the loss of both Palestinian and Israeli lives, the country's history of apartheid continues to guide the ANC's policies.
We've called on the international community, the United Nations, and all other concerned international bodies to make sure that peace is installed in Palestine and that the Israeli government is directed at withdrawing this command of getting people out of the northern part of Gaza, because it is in the end going to amount to almost genocide.
Ramaphosa has called for a peaceful resolution.
In 2017, South Africa downgraded its ties with Israel in response to what it described as human rights abuses against Palestinians. The Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Naledi Pandor, says Israel is illegally occupying Palestinian land. She recently spoke to Hamas leaders and offered humanitarian aid.
But the South African government's stance has been criticized by some pro-Israeli lobby groups, which have reacted with anger.
After the massacre of Hamas on the innocent lives of Israelis in Israel, we've been exceptionally disappointed with the government. They, first of all, they only condemned Israel originally, then they only sent condolences, and then eventually they have condemned Hamas. But I think for us, it's been incredibly concerning that our Minister of Durka, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Naledi Pandor, had a call with Hamas.
Meanwhile, anger and criticism against the Israeli government is growing, with several civil society organizations garnering support for a global anti-apartheid movement. Famida Miller, Al Jazeera, Johannesburg.
Well, let's take you back to the situation right now. These are live pictures coming in from Gaza City, where we can see plumes of smoke once again rising over Gaza. As always, there's AlJazeera.com for you. Weather is next, then it's Inside Story.
Hello there. Here's how it's looking right across Asia on Friday. Quiet for Pakistan, but we could see some showers coming in off the Caspian Sea for Tehran at 23 degrees for sure. More cloud cover in the mix there. Also quiet in India, but I got to point this out. We've got this developing in the Arabian Sea. This could be our first post-monsoon cyclone of the season in the Arabian Sea. So I'm going to put this several days forward. Now on Monday, we could see a potential landfall in southeast Yemen. So we'll keep tabs on that. Meantime, we've got our tropical storm in the Gulf of Tonkin, and it's pretty much just swirling around this area, wringing out its moisture over China's Yunnan province. So quite a bit of rain to come here. Could see some flooding. Meantime, a northerly wind has really knocked back those temperatures in Guangxi province. So Guilin, 19 degrees, that's below average for this time of the year. Then there's this weather maker that's coming crashing into Japan. This is a cold front, so it's going to give us rain, wind, and drop down those temperatures. Already we can see what it's done to the Korean peninsula, temperatures in the teens. So if I put this a day forward, there's that drop in temperatures for Tokyo, 21, that's below average. And it's our usual showers and storms for both Sumatra Island and Borneo Island. See you later.
U.S. President Joe Biden has reaffirmed Washington's support for Israel a day after hundreds of Palestinians were killed in an Israeli strike on a hospital in Gaza. What's behind steadfast U.S. military and political backing for Israel? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Foliba Thibault. The U.S. has firmly backed Israel during the war it's launched against Gaza, despite an intensifying humanitarian crisis for the 2.3 million Palestinians trapped in the besieged territory. Since Israel's foundation in 1948, the U.S. has been its biggest donor of military aid. It's provided funding and arms in conflicts that have killed thousands of Palestinians and made refugees of millions. Visiting Tel Aviv, U.S. President Joe Biden personally reassured Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of continued support.
Israel, as they respond to these attacks, it seems to me that have to continue to ensure that you have what you need to defend yourselves. And we're going to make sure that occurs.
Well, Biden arrived in Tel Aviv just a day after the worst single attack carried out on Gaza since October the 7th. Here's what he had to say about the hospital strike.
I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you. But there's a lot of people out there who are not sure. So we've got to overcome a lot of things.
Well, before we go to our panel, let's speak to Alan Fisher in Tel Aviv. Alan, tell us more about what came out of this meeting between Biden and Netanyahu. Is there any shift at all in the U.S. position?
No, they're fully behind Israel. Certainly, it was Israel's intention after what happened at the hospital in Gaza to convince the Americans that they were not responsible. From Joe Biden's comments, it appears that that wasn't much of a heavy lift, that he'd already decided from what he was gathering. And certainly, he has said that the information he got from the Pentagon would suggest that the Israelis were not behind it. He's talked about how his support for Israel is steadfast, how they are fully behind what they're about to do in far as taking on Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Certainly, he would like to see some humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. But what is interesting is that in the past, when there have been conflicts in this area, US presidents have tended to use the word restraint, asking both sides to exercise it. That word has not appeared in any statement that Joe Biden has made since he first commented on what happened last Saturday, just hours after the event.
Yeah, he's had very little to say about the Palestinians in those comments. How is this all playing out in the region?
Well, he did say that Hamas was not the Palestinians, that they did not represent the Palestinians, and he's spoken about innocent people getting caught up in the fighting. But people in the region, in the Arab countries, are particularly angry that America seems to have taken Israel's side, particularly with the growing number of bodies piling up in Gaza. There is a concern that he has perhaps been blinded to the fact of the humanitarian crisis and isn't doing enough to deter the Israelis. And that could have long-term implications. We certainly saw there was anger towards Joe Biden when the three Arab leaders, the president of Egypt, the president of the Palestinian Authority, and surprisingly, the king of Jordan, who's a very close US ally, decided to pull out of the meeting with him that was scheduled in Amman after his visit here to Israel. That shows the level of dissatisfaction they are with the US response, not least the fact that Joe Biden was not prepared to call for a ceasefire, and the Arab leaders felt that if they did not do that and were standing next to Joe Biden when he did not do that, they would almost be complicit in what many people think is about to happen.
Alan Fisher in Tel Aviv, thank you. Let's meet our guests in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. We're joined by Dalal Irikat, Assistant Professor of Conflicts Resolution and Diplomacy at the Arab American University. Dalal is also a columnist for Al-Quds newspaper. In Washington, D.C. is Khaled El-Gindi, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute and author of Blind Spot, America and the Palestinians from Balfour to Trump. And also in Washington, D.C., Phyllis Bennis, a fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies think tank and international advisor to the Jewish Voice for Peace organization. Phyllis, let me start with you in Washington to understand why we've seen a visit of support by President Biden to Tel Aviv, to Israel, even after the massacre at the Al Ali Baptist Hospital in Gaza, even at a time when the region is boiling. Why? Why is the U.S. so committed in supporting Israel today?
That's a very long story, and we don't have time to go into the history, but I think the question today is the consequences of this visit. This bear hug diplomacy that we've seen so far means that unless there's a public call for a ceasefire, which I do not anticipate we will see, this visit is going to be seen and should be seen as a real endorsement of Israel's continuing attack against Gaza. There are likely to be vague references to urging Israel not to violate international law or expressing some kind of concern for Palestinian civilians. But the reality is that the bombing is continuing. Gaza is still under assault and threatened with a ground invasion. And in that context, the violations of international law are already underway. So what we're seeing here is, as much as anything else, based on U.S. politics. Biden is proving once again his own pro-Israel credentials. And this notion of the extreme one-sidedness, using the language of teams, is just an expression of that. This is not going to work unless there's a call for a ceasefire, if he had any hope of seeing this as winning any level of support in the region or elsewhere.
Khalid, your thoughts? An extraordinary show of support from the Biden administration at a time when the U.S. should be calling for restraint, and the keyword restraint was missing from those comments in Tel Aviv. Restraint is something that previous administrations have used on calling for both sides to exercise restraint in past escalations. Why has Biden not done this?
It's actually been quite shocking to me as an analyst who's followed this issue for many years. The absence of calls for a ceasefire, the inability to articulate even an expression of basic human empathy for Palestinians, in addition to the inability to urge, sort of create red lines and urge Israel to show restraint. These are all things that had previously been fairly standard elements of U.S. policy in times of crisis. Even going back to the second Intifada, during the height of the violence, at a time when Hamas was blowing up weddings and pizzerias, the U.S. officials, even the president at the time, was able to identify red lines and urge Israel to exercise restraint. We're not seeing any of that right now, and the danger, of course, of giving Israel an effective green light is that we're likely to see more death and destruction.
Why do you think we're not seeing that right now? Are domestic politics also at play here with the election coming up next year?
It's domestic politics, sure, but it's also the person of Joe Biden. He's deeply, personally very committed to Israel. He's expressed that many times, and I think it's sincere, and I don't believe that he's just pandering. Of course, it doesn't hurt in terms of domestic politics. But there's a real inability to see not just Palestinians and their suffering, but even in terms of the long-term consequences of this. I mean, if you look at this rationally, maybe too rationally, and imagine, well, the extraordinary pain and trauma that Palestinians are experiencing right now, and the anger that will turn into. It's hard to see how anyone would imagine that this scale of death and destruction in Gaza would ever bring anything like security for Israel. So there's a kind of suspension even of the ability to reason in the long term.
Dalal, let me get your thoughts on this. Why and what do you make of this unconditional U.S. support for Israel? We heard Biden say in Tel Aviv that he would continue to work with partners across the region. But do they want to work with him? Does Biden's embrace of Israel set him on a collision course with Arab leaders?
Well, I think what we had just seen is another example of the U.S. shielding Israeli war crimes against the Palestinian people. Last night, everybody has watched a massacre against 500 Palestinian civilians, mostly children and women. The least we had expected from Mr. Biden today was a condemnation of the state-organized terror by Israel. As long as the U.S. continues to reward the Israeli war crimes against the Palestinian people, the Israelis will continue with impunity, massacring the Palestinians. One more thing that we have to focus on today, the framing. Biden had tried to mislead the audiences in supporting the Israeli narrative by saying that this is friendly Palestinian fire. I want to remind you of Shireen Abu Akleh's murder. When they massacred Shireen Abu Akleh, they said they had evidence. It is friendly fire. We did not see any evidence. When they labeled 6 Palestinian human rights organizations as terrorists, they said we have evidence. The Israelis always try to spin the realities. They want to mislead the audiences. This is the message. The Palestinians in Gaza are being massacred, genocide, war crimes, forced displacements, and everything is documented. We are living 2023. The whole world is watching. Diplomacy had failed the Palestinian civilians in Gaza. 2.2 million Palestinians, 50% are children. 1 million children are deprived from water, medicine, food, electricity. While the international community is watching, the international community has an obligation under Article 146 of the Geneva Conventions. They have to search for the criminals and hold them accountable in their crimes. The Palestinian civilians are entitled to protection under Article 49 of the Geneva Conventions. The UN has an obligation to enforce humanitarian aid to the Palestinians besides ceasefire and the protection of the civilians.
Dalal, let me come back to my question. And you are right. The Americans have said that their national team would look into the explosion at the hospital, but it seems that President Biden has already made his mind up as to who's responsible. He said the other team in his words. Coming back to my question, Dalal, what about Arab leaders? We've seen them snub Biden, cancel the meeting that was scheduled in Jordan. Will this posturing and position by the U.S. leader put him in a collision course now with the Arab world?
Listen, when I remind the world leaders of their obligations under the Geneva Conventions, the Arab leaders are also included. The Palestinians have gone into a 30-year peace process, a sugar-coated peace process. For 75 years, for God's sake, we have been suffering injustices, enduring the injustices under apartheid, extrajudicial killings, detentions, confiscations of lands, settlements, and settler terror, all under the package of a prolonged Israeli military occupation. We need to address the root causes of the reality that we are witnessing. Continued series of war crimes are being documented on every screen. It is time that every leader, every member state of the UN needs to invoke Article 25. Every country is now obliged to act upon their words and the Security Council resolutions and the General Assembly resolutions by granting the Palestinians their right. The Palestinian people have a right to self-determination, a right to defense, and a right to resistance. Yet, what we are seeing, what we are witnessing, hold on, please. This is a translation of the deal of the century in the Middle East. We are witnessing a change of the geopolitics map at the expense of the Palestinian blood. They are evicting the Palestinian people to the south, to Sinai, and then the scenario of the settler colonial project will continue to the West Bank in the hopes of eliminating the Palestinian cause. This war is not against Hamas. It's not against Gaza. It's against the Palestinian cause, against the Palestinian people. We have a right, and everybody should stand for their own obligations.
Phyllis, your thoughts about what Dalal just said there and the U.S. position. Is it likely to ever shift, or are we going to continue to see this bipartisan policy towards Israel in Washington, D.C.? For a long time, it's been the case. There was somewhat of a blip under the Obama administration because he didn't have good relations with Netanyahu. But it seems that it doesn't matter who's in the White House, the policy stays the same.
The policy has been consistent for many, many decades. The so-called special relationship between the U.S. and Israel that began around the time of the 1967 war began as a military relationship and morphed into the broad-based political, diplomatic, economic, and political as well as military relationship we see now. The United States taxpayers are paying 20% of the entire Israeli military budget. I think there is one thing we have to keep in mind about this question of a ceasefire. What is most desperately needed right now, what we are hearing from all Palestinians across Palestine, across the diaspora, everywhere, is an immediate ceasefire. We have to recognize the U.S. has a history of rejecting ceasefires when there are international calls for a ceasefire when Israel is involved. This goes back to 2006 in the Lebanon war. in cast lead against Gaza in 2008 and 9, in 2014, again in 2021. In each of these instances, when Israel was at war, as they defined it, meaning they were attacking Palestinians, there was a call for a ceasefire, and the U.S. answer again and again, we don't need a ceasefire yet, meaning not enough people have been killed yet. We're facing that same problem now, and the challenge of facing people who are protesting today in Washington, who were out in the streets on Monday, will be again on Friday, is to demand an immediate ceasefire to break that refusal to call for a ceasefire on all sides, an immediate ceasefire right now.
Khalid, your thoughts? And what's happened, Khalid, to the voices of progressive Democrats in Congress who want the U.S. to take a harder line with Israel over its military assault on Gaza? What's happened to them?
Well, I think those voices have almost entirely been silenced, in large part because of the initial attack in Israel by Hamas. The horror of it and the scale of it has really silenced people who might have otherwise been more critical of how Israel has conducted itself. We're starting to see some pushback now. There are more calls from Democrats for a ceasefire, which seems reasonable. But part of the problem here, this goes beyond the United States. Most Western nations have also failed to call for a ceasefire. That's different than in the past, where, as Phyllis mentioned, it was usually the United States kind of blocking or dragging their feet on a ceasefire, but they were usually alone. Now there is a kind of chorus of Western powers showing unrestrained solidarity and support and unconditional endorsement, really, of what Israel is doing on the ground in Gaza. And to me, that's even more shocking because essentially everyone is being ruled by emotions, and there are no, quote unquote, grown-ups anywhere who are able to see the horrible human costs of what's happening, but even the medium and long-term repercussions of serious erosion, if not destruction, of Western credibility as a whole, with regard to anything resembling a rules-based order. I think it will be impossible for not only Palestinians, but Arabs, Africans, Latin Americans, Asians, ever to take the U.S. or European nations seriously when they talk about human rights or international law or any of those things that have been completely thrown out the window in this case.
Dalal, your thoughts about this? Yes, go ahead, Phyllis. Go ahead, Phyllis, before I bring in Dalal.
Just one point on what Khalid was just saying, which I think is so important. Just coming back to the U.S. side, it is important to recognize there has been now an official resolution introduced into the Congress calling directly for a ceasefire, very carefully framed to not try and win over views of what started it, whose fault, just calling for an immediate ceasefire that now has, I think, 13 co-signers. And it reflects the fact that there has been a movement focused on changing the narrative, changing the discourse in this country, which has led to a situation where, as of about 2 weeks ago, the most recent polls were indicating that 25% of American Jews, 38% of young Jews believe that Israel is an apartheid state. That's because there's been a movement mobilizing with the press, with Congress, with the public for 25 years now. And we're seeing that there's a threat to that accomplishment. But right now, I think it still exists. And we're seeing public levels of support for Palestinians even now, despite the incredible levels of terrible press.
Yeah, it is true that it would appear that more Americans are warming to the Palestinian cause, according to the latest Gallup poll. Dalal, let me come to you now. As Khalid said, things go far beyond the U.S., of course, away from the U.S. today. Is there a single country that could be a fair broker here, call for a ceasefire that would be respected, agreed to by Israel, and be a fair and honest broker in this conflict?
Let's remind the American public that this is an accumulative reflection of their 3.8 billion annual aid of military aid to Israel, the war crimes that are being committed against 2.2 million Palestinian civilians living in a big prison of 365 kilometers, mostly children. You know, I want to also remember and ask the Jewish American organizations for their voices. I want to call upon all academics, universities, the Harvard School of Negotiations, scholars. Where are the people who work for peace studies and conflict resolution? I am a professor of diplomacy. We have failed our students. You know, I have looked into the UN Charter, the international law, the international humanitarian law, the 4 Geneva Conventions, the Rome Statute. I couldn't find one article that supports waiting for a permission from the occupier to let in humanitarian aid. What is the international community waiting for? Why don't they send drones, send the humanitarian assistance and protection for the Palestinian civilians? 2 million Palestinian civilians are being massacred on the screens, and the whole world is watching. Diplomacy had failed humanity. Diplomacy had failed the Palestinian cause. It is time we speak the truth. Please do not adopt the Israeli narrative anymore. They are misleading the audience. It's about time in 2023 to speak the truth, to tell the stories of the injustices and the endurance of injustices that the Palestinian people have been enduring for 75 years, let alone the 16 years of total deadly blockade on Gaza. It's about time we recognize the Gazans as human beings. Gaza is Palestine. This is not a war between Israel and Hamas. This is not against Gaza, not against Hamas. This is against the Palestinian right to self-determination. This is a translation of the deal of the century at the expense of the Palestinian blood. This is, again, also part of the electoral process campaigns of Biden and Netanyahu coming in the next year.
All right, Khalid, what are your thoughts about what Dalal just said there? She says diplomacy has failed. Has it? Is there still room, you think, to get a ceasefire here? And is there a country, as I asked Dalal, that could step in today and take that role of a fair and honest broker in this conflict, which the US has been criticized of not being?
Unfortunately, no. I don't see any power that could play that role. I mean, but yes, there is hope for a ceasefire. There has to be. I mean, obviously, this death and destruction can't continue indefinitely, although it can continue for quite a long time. And that's why I was saying how alarming it is that there don't seem to be any reasonable, rational people in the diplomatic world who can see that, who can see the dangers, not just of, certainly at a humanitarian level just given the scale of the attack in all forms. And it's very clearly directed at civilians in Gaza. But what really alarms me is the total inability to see how this will impact any future process. I don't see any political process happening anytime soon. But let me make one other point, because I think it's important to mention the role of Palestinian leadership. One of the things that history tells us, the Palestinian people know this better than anyone else, because of their history, is when they don't have a credible leadership, very bad things happen to Palestinians. Think of 1948, think of 1967. And I'm sorry to say, right now, part of the problem that we have, in addition to the abdication of responsibility by the Western world, is the absence of a credible Palestinian leadership that can advocate for Palestinians on the world stage and that can seek diplomatic opportunities. Right now, we have a failed leadership, both in Gaza and, I'm afraid to say, in the West Bank.
OK, let me ask Dalal about that before I bring in Phyllis. Dalal, Khalid says the absence of a Palestinian leadership has also contributed to the predicament that Palestinians find themselves in today.
Well, it's about time we go for our unity. It's about time we go for reconciliation and to end our division. My call to the Palestinian leadership of all different political factions is to unite now, because this had been a pretext. This has been the fig leaf that has been used against us from the international community. Again, they are looking at us and saying they're not worthy of a Palestinian state. They're not worthy of independence and recognition. And this is a setback on the internal level that I recognize. However, we need to look at 12 days of of massacres and war crimes of genocide and forced displacement as war crimes which are being treated with total impunity by the international community. 2.2 million Palestinian civilians are suffering under the Israeli fire. And, you know, the company, Boeing, is an American company. The military aid of money for the U.S. that is pouring into Israel. This is, again, an international legal coverage for the war crimes that are documented on the screens being perpetrated against the Palestinian people and civilians, and this should not be accepted. This should not be tolerated. And this is not only in Gaza. In the past week, we had more than 60 martyrs in the West Bank. This means that every Palestinian is target. No matter what you believe, no matter your ideology, no matter your color, Israel is targeting every single Palestinian. Israel is waging a war against truth. Whoever tries to tell the truth about Israel and its war crimes is being targeted.
Phyllis, your thoughts about what happens next year? And has President Biden given the green light to Israel now to do whatever it wants in Gaza?
I think that whatever President Biden says, the image of his bear hug diplomacy is seen as a green light for Israel to do what it wants, to continue these incredible violations of international law, crimes against humanity that are being committed. I think that we have to be looking for where there might be calls for ceasefire that can come from elsewhere, not from, as Khalid said, not from the U.S., not from the Europeans. Right
from
now,
where?
Brazil is chairing. Brazil is the president of the Security Council.
Dalal, are you hopeful that a ceasefire could be reached in the next few days?
I hope so. However, it is really sad that while we are waiting for a ceasefire and that we are waiting for action, a diplomatic action, millions of Palestinians are perishing, and women and children are deprived from water, from milk, from medicine. The hospitals, the doctors are operating in the hallways without electricity and without anesthesia. We are witnessing a human historic catastrophe, which is documented on the screen. And let us be clear, yesterday's hospital is an Anglican hospital, and King Charles is the head of the Anglican Church. What did he do? We need to hear it from the UK. We need to hear it from the US. We need to hear it from every leader. It is not okay that hospitals are being targeted, that people are being evicted, and war crimes are being documented while everybody is watching. Humanity is at risk, and we have all failed humanity. It's about time we see Palestinians as human beings.
Thank you all. Thank you to all three of you for a great discussion. Dalal Irikat, Khalid El-Gindi, and Phyllis Bennis. Thank you for joining us on Inside Story. And thank you, too, for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And, of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Fuli Batibo, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Amidst the world slowdown, we stand firm as home to a fifth of global nickel reserves. Indonesia is poised to lead the global EV battery industry. We adeptly manage our abundant resources and play a vital role in solar energy harnessing, offering 75% of global carbon credit potential, committed to environmental protection, enhancing investment climate through digital licensing. Indonesia, your better tomorrow.
Hey, thanks for joining me. Hope you're doing well. We are streaming on Facebook, YouTube, High on Global Politics Radio, LinkedIn. We don't have really anybody tuning in on LinkedIn. It's first time here, but for all those on the website, High on Global Politics Radio, thanks for joining me. And yeah, we're talking about the genocide that's actively taking place before our very eyes in Gaza, with the support of the U.S. administration, the U.S. Congress, the European Union, These are the countries that, we're waving up their arms and pointing their finger at Russia every time a building got hit. And here we have before our very eyes an entire civilian population being squeezed. No water. Can I repeat that one more time? No water. They are denying human beings, babies, mothers, toddlers, little children, little boys, little girls, men, women, elderly, clergy, doctors, nurses. They are denying them water. The basic building block of life. They are denying them water. I could spend a half an hour saying that over and over again, and you have these people making excuses. Hamas isn't, they're trying to attack Hamas. Hamas did this. You are denying 2.3 million people. Israel, you and the U.S. administration and the European Union is denying over 2 million people water and food and medicine and electricity and fuel, and on top of that, bombing them. Water. Denying human beings water. This goes down in the annals of barbaric behavior, right alongside the German Nazis of World War II. And the Belgians in the Congo. Denying human beings water and medicine. That means people are going to die shortly from lack of dialysis, lack of care for their diabetes, lack of care for their heart conditions, lack of care for asthma, other ailments, infection. People who are wounded will die of infection. People will die from drinking dirty water. Right now, numerous reports of people drinking seawater and contaminated, polluted water. Why are all these countries so afraid of Israel or backing this genocidal action? Von der Leyen, this German former defense minister, Joe Biden, now they're calling him Genocide Joe on Twitter, Kamala Harris, Macron, and they want to talk about pauses, humanitarian pauses, which is the bare necessity, the very bare of a criminal action. It's like seeing someone killing innocent people and just say, could you just pause it for a little bit so we can, rub their feet and then you can go back to killing? Yeah, that's the bare minimum to give them a fighting chance. What, 20 trucks of humanitarian aid, which we don't know that the Israelis will not bomb them? What about the fuel? What about the fuel to run the hospitals? What about the fuel to pump the water? Jeez.
Talking about 2 million people that are basically in need of everything. So 20 trucks will be a drop in the ocean. It needs to be much more than that. Obviously, we do welcome any aid entering in the country, but we will have to have much more than that to be able to fit the needs of all the people that are in Gaza, those that are in the south, but all those that have stayed more up north.
Israel has bombed the Rafah crossing before. Do you know if it's even ready at this point to quickly, efficiently process aid?
No, it's very complicated to know exactly, and we don't even know the conditions. I mean, what we know is that there's for any humanitarian aid action distribution, there needs to be safety. We need to make sure that the area where the aid is going, the passage where whatever convoy will come is safe. And then we need safety for the people for the civilians that will be receiving the aid, and for the health workers that will be distributing it. So it's still very unclear on all the conditions around this opening.
Initially, the diplomatic discussions were about a ceasefire. Then it shifted and watered down to a humanitarian pause in fighting. As far as you know, as an aid organization, has anyone given you any guarantees, any commitments that there will not be airstrikes when you're supposed to be receiving and distributing aid?
No, I don't think we have any commitment at this stage, at least, and it's probably negotiations ongoing. But we've seen over the last 10 days, the bombing has been ongoing. We've lost tragically 4 of our paramedics from the Palestinian Red Crescent while they were carrying their duty, trying to save lives. So this is when people are being injured or dead while they are helping people. It's terrible for us, because they are really trying to do their job the best they can. They are in hospitals, in 2 hospitals in Gaza, and they've refused to leave because they are trying to help their patients, the people that they're taking care of for now days and weeks.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in West Jerusalem. Sunak described the Israeli strike on the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza as a watershed moment. He is pushing for humanitarian aid to be delivered to Gaza as soon as possible. Sunak is due to meet with Saudi Arabian leaders in the next few days.
We also recognize that the Palestinian people are victims of Hamas too. And that is why I welcome your decision yesterday
victims of the man you're sitting next to,
ensure that routes into Gaza will be opened for humanitarian aid to enter. I'm glad that you made that decision. We will support it. We're increasing our aid to the region, and we will look to get more support to people as quickly as we can. The last thing for me to close on is this. You describe this as Israel's darkest hour. Well, then it's for me to say I'm proud to stand here with you in Israel's darkest hour as your friend. We will stand with you in solidarity. We will stand with your people, and we also
partners in genocide.
Al Jazeera's Mohammed Jamjoom is live for us in occupied East Jerusalem. Mohammed, what's your main takeaway from Sunak's visit?
So, Cyril, one of the more interesting points about what Sunak was saying was that he, of course, expressed staunch solidarity with Israel. He, of course, reiterated the UK's position that Israel has the right to defend itself. But he also said that operations should be carried out within the bounds of international law. And the reason that is noteworthy is because many would consider the fact that Israel has cut off food, fuel, and water to the Gaza Strip to be in breach of international law. So that's a glaring omission when he's also saying that he wants Israel to operate their operations within Gaza under the auspices of international law. Now, Rishi Sunak also said that the UK will stand behind Israel all the way, that he hopes that Israel will win in this campaign. But in his meetings today, not just with Prime Minister Netanyahu, but also with Israel's President Isaac Herzog, he reiterated the concern for a humanitarian corridor to be opened into Gaza. He would like to see humanitarian aid flow into Gaza. He also wants to see that Rafah border crossing opened so that British nationals, dual nationals who are stuck inside of Gaza, can actually get out of Gaza and get into Egypt. No commitments yet on that. Netanyahu, for his part, thanked the Prime Minister for coming. He was very happy to see Sunak in Israel and for the support. Netanyahu said that this is Israel's darkest hour and that the support must continue. That's clearly indicating that Prime Minister Netanyahu is aware that Israel is going to face mounting criticism from the international community in the days, weeks, and potentially months ahead when it comes to its campaign on Gaza, the potential offensive on Gaza. And he wants to make sure that those Western leaders who have come to visit him in Israel will continue their support. You're talking, of course, about Rishi Sunak today. Yesterday, you had U.S. President Joe Biden. That's the biggest diplomatic visit he's gotten thus far. There are going to be more leaders expected here in the days ahead. It's expected that French President Emmanuel Macron will be coming here as well. So really, you had Britain standing in solidarity with Israel. You had Sunak expressing that solidarity again and again, but clearly there is a lot of concern about what is going to be happening on the humanitarian front in Gaza.
Yeah, I have a question about that, Mohammed, but first a quick update. We're just hearing from Sunak's spokesperson, and he said that 9 British nationals have been confirmed dead in the Hamas attack on October 7th. A further 7 are missing. Just wanted to share that information with you. About the concerns on the delivery of the aid, did Sunak get any guarantees or seek any guarantees that Israeli airstrikes would stop while aid is being delivered in Gaza?
Cyril, there was nothing stated publicly on that front. Now, clearly, there has been a lot of behind-the-scenes pressure being put from U.S. President Joe Biden, from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, on Benjamin Netanyahu to stop air raids on Gaza while any type of humanitarian aid would be delivered, while the humanitarian corridor would be opened. But that's not anything that the Israelis have commented on publicly at this stage. Netanyahu has not made any remarks to that effect. These Western leaders are keenly aware that they need to continue to press this humanitarian message because there is discontent that they are facing from their countries as well. There have been protests in the US, in the UK the last week about what's going on in Gaza. So while they are standing in solidarity with Israel, they are pressing this humanitarian message because they're aware that this could politically be a problem for them as well.
I want to jump in real quick because as you speak, we're watching screen left a massive plume of smoke and the aftermath of what appears to have been a very heavy strike, a bombardment on the Gaza Strip. So as you and I were discussing whether the British Prime Minister was perhaps seeking a suspension of bombardments, I just wanted to make this point clear with you. Right now, even as it has received Biden, it has received the British Prime Minister, Israel continuing, of course, its bombardment of the Gaza Strip.
That's right. And on a day like today, when Sunak was here and pressing for more humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, when it's still not clear exactly when those 20 trucks that have been agreed to that are supposed to cross into the Gaza Strip, it's still unclear when exactly they're going to be able to do that. The best estimate right now, as early as that could happen, would be tomorrow on Friday. But even on a day when the UK's Prime Minister continues to go on about the concern about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, which is deteriorating exponentially by the hour, you're still seeing these airstrikes. And obviously, that is not the kind of optics that Sunak or Joe Biden yesterday would like on a day when they are arriving here and trying to press this message and trying to privately put pressure on Netanyahu to at least allow
Mohammed, I'm going to jump in
into the Gaza Strip.
Mohammed, I'm going to jump in. Thank you for all that context. Thank you for the analysis. We see continued bombardments live on the Gaza Strip with a massive mushroom cloud. And clearly the bombardments are continuing. I can't tell you right now whether this is the north or the south, but these bombardments have been relentless. And there is no halt. There is no halt in the bombing of the Gaza Strip, where 2.2 million people live in one of the most densely populated parts of the world. Now, we were talking to our correspondent earlier, Safwat Al-Kahlout, even as I'm being told this is a view of the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Our correspondent telling us there's some degree of hope because some trucks are scheduled, are expected, delivering aid in the Gaza Strip, but it's 20 trucks for 2 million people. And as our guests from humanitarian missions have told us, it's, quote, a drop in the ocean. And whether that aid is even going to be able to get to residents of the northern Gaza Strip, given that the aid is coming in from the south and through the Rafah crossing, if it does come in, that's expected on Friday, but there's still no guarantee as such. If that aid does come in those 20 trucks, will it even get to the people who live here, live in the buildings that you see and in this part of the Gaza Strip, since there's no fuel. And no fuel will be allowed to come in as part of the deal that will let these 20 trucks in. So this is the scene. It's 15:20 GMT, which means it's 6:20 in the Gaza Strip. And we are seeing the same thing day in, day out. Continued bombardment by Israel pretty much since October 7th, since the Hamas attack. That's where things stand right now. We'll continue to take a live look at the skies over Gaza, even as I bring you the latest on the tangential diplomatic efforts of the UK, because while British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been in Israel, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has arrived in Qatar, and that's part of a 3-day diplomatic visit to the Middle East aimed at securing the release of British hostages and ensuring humanitarian aid into Gaza. Remember the update that we just got from the Prime Minister's spokesperson. 9 British nationals were confirmed dead, killed in the October 7 Hamas attack. A further 7 are missing. All right, Egypt was the first stop of Cleverly's trip, and he's expected to travel to Turkey next. Now, it's been nearly 48 hours since an Israeli strike hit the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza, killing hundreds of people and triggering global outrage. Many of the victims were taking shelter at the hospital from Israel's relentless bombardment of the besieged enclave. The Episcopal Church in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank is holding a service for the victims of the war on Gaza, including the people massacred at the Al-Ahli hospital. Hoda Abdelhamid is in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Hoda, tell us more about this church service.
Well, the Episcopal Church is actually oversees the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza. It issued a statement earlier in the day denouncing what had happened in Gaza, calling it a crime against humanity, targeting hospitals and the church that were on that grounds. The Episcopal Church saying that tantamounts to crimes against humanity. Now, this service is just on the way. It's basically to pray for all those who have fallen, but it's also a show of defiance, saying that statement clearly said, and the people coming in here clearly said, yes, they can hurt us, yes, they can try to crush it, but we will always stand up again. We should be hearing later from the priest. I think in his sermon there'll be some quite harsh words towards what is happening in Israel and in Gaza, rather, and a lot of support to Gaza, rather, and harsh words towards the military operation that Israel is undertaking at the moment.
Hoda, on Thursday, we saw another Israeli raid in the occupied West Bank. The arrests and the killings by Israeli forces have just increased so sharply since the beginning of the war on Gaza. Can you give us the context around that?
Well, that is something that is ongoing every day, all day. I'm really sorry for this. Every day you wake up in the West Bank and you ask what happened overnight, how many people were detained, how many people were killed in overnight raids. There is a standoff that has been going on actually since for more than 12 hours now. That is in the north, in Tulkarem. So far, 6 people have died there, and the standoff is still ongoing. The area is completely shut down. It's a refugee camp next to Tulkarem, completely sealed off at the moment. People can't come in and out. And the last we heard is that electricity and water was also cut off from that area. And then there were 3 others that were killed also in overnight raids. But the tragic story about this is that these numbers keep on increasing on a daily basis. Every day you have to update your tally. There were more than 800 people who had been detained since October 7th when this crisis started. And one person I was talking to earlier in the day, he said, you know, we keep on praying on the souls of those who have died. But then next morning we have to start all over again, because next morning there are new victims, new fallen, new people who have been killed. So it is just this continuous cycle of death and violence that is in the West Bank, and that has been going on since before this crisis, and it's just ever since October 7th, a big turning point. Things have become much worse for anyone living in the occupied West Bank. The number of settler attacks, which used to be on average 3 per day, according to the UN humanitarian agency here, well, now they're at least on average 8 a day. So as you can see, these numbers are increasing disproportionately. And one of the reasons Hamas said that it had carried out this operation, that it wanted to put pressure on Israel, is also because of what the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank go through on a daily basis. It's a different kind of occupation, and Gaza is under siege all year long. But here, in this part of the occupied territories, the friction with the occupation is constant day and night, and you never know if you're a Palestinian from where it's coming to you.
Hoda, thank you very much. That's Al Jazeera's Hoda Abdelhamid. You're in Ramallah. You're reporting from the church service that was being held for the victims of the Israeli attack on the hospital in Gaza. And I want to get the latest again from Gaza on the ground. We're watching the live picture of the skies over Gaza right now. It's becoming a little harder to see the smoke over the cityscape and the horizon. But this is Gaza City that you are watching. And just minutes ago, we saw live intense bombardment of multiple targets, what appeared to be multiple targets, in Gaza City. Al Jazeera correspondent Yumna Al-Sayed is in the Gaza Strip. Where are you, Yumna? Did you hear or see anything?
Yes, well, Gerald, these bombardments have been intensified in this past hour, especially in different areas, almost at the same time, really. The first bombardments started here in the west part of Gaza City in Tel El Hawa neighborhood, which has been under continuous bombardment since last night, literally, starting with the Al-Yasj bakery that was targeted last night and all onto the morning hours, and different other areas here. The first bombardment in this past hour started there, and then in Gaza, in the eastern part of Gaza City, in Shaja'iyya and in Zaytun, multiple bombardments there have targeted multiple residential homes and areas in these two places. So it's been an hour of continuous violent Israeli airstrikes in Gaza City, mainly for this past hour, as they continue until now.
Yumna, have Palestinians been going back up to Gaza City? I ask you because you told me the other day this was the case, and this was also what you had chosen to do, namely, after the Israeli military warned everybody to leave the north, go to the south, after a few days of that, people found that there was continued bombardment in the south, and you told me a lot of people figured, well, if I'm not safe anywhere, I might as well go back to the north where at least I have a house or an apartment. Are there now a lot of civilians living in those areas in Gaza City?
Well, Gerald, that's actually the case more and more every day. Like today, even more people than yesterday did return that we know about. People are witnessing more and more intensifying bombardments in the south in a very strange way. The past days, the bombardments and the targeting of the south has been extremely much. Many of the people who have died in these bombardments were actually families from the northern part of Gaza City.
Yumna, respectfully, I have to jump in, Yumna, because the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is now speaking live from Cairo, along with the Egyptian Foreign Minister. Let's listen in.
For his critical leadership. I am in the Middle East on a humanitarian mission at a moment of profound crisis, a crisis unlike any the region has seen in decades. That crisis was triggered by the atrocious 7 October Hamas attacks that killed, injured and kidnapped a large number of civilians from Israel and indeed from around the world. But this led Israel to a total siege on Gaza and a relentless bombing campaign with an ever
المكثفة والتي طالت بشكل كبير.
but also journalists, health workers, and many others, including...
All right, that's UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. So the head of the United Nations, he's in Egypt. Obviously, Egypt playing a major role here since Egypt controls the Rafah border crossing, the only door out of Gaza right now that is not also controlled by the Israelis. And he is speaking along with the Egyptian foreign minister. Now, remember the context. Number one is that the UN Secretary General has called for a ceasefire. That's language that is new as of yesterday or the previous day, and the first 10 or 11 days of this crisis, the UN actually hadn't called at the highest echelon for a ceasefire, but now he is doing so. And there are many questions around how that aid is going to be delivered, around the volume of the aid, the amount, where it's going, and how it's even going to be distributed within the Gaza Strip, given that no fuel is going to be allowed in. As we keep an eye on that, and we keep an eye on the skies over Gaza, that live shot just moments after we saw continued bombardments on Gaza City, I want to bring in Sultan Barakat. You are professor of public policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University here in Qatar. Thank you for being with us. I want to talk with you a little bit about what the Arab and Muslim nations can do at this stage for the Palestinians. I say this because there were statements coming out of Iran today saying the Islamic world's silence is completely unjustified. This was in a phone call with Qatar. And now you see the UN Secretary General in Egypt. There's also the King of Jordan, who's in Egypt. Where does diplomacy stand right now within the Arab world in support of the Palestinians?
Well, the two worlds within the Arab world and the Muslim world, there are the states and the people on the streets. I think the public has made their views very, very clear throughout the Muslim world.
We've seen protests.
Huge protests, demonstrations, and so on. But when it comes to the states, they have been more reluctant to make a direct statement against the situation in Gaza, partly because of fear of the implication that may bring vis-a-vis the United States, in particular their relationship with the United States. Others have already tied themselves into processes of normalization with Israel and or already had peace agreements with Israel. So, for example, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, even Sudan.
Well, Jordan and Egypt,
Bahrain,
that's decades old. But countries, the Abraham Accords, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, that's very recent. Do you think that their normalizing of ties with Israel, do you think that could become more fragile as this conflict continues?
It has to. It must become more fragile. I mean, the problem now is that they're still banking on the fact that there is hope in the process. But their public will be very much against it. It will be very, very difficult.
Hope in what process?
In the normalization, that it can continue as if it hasn't been interrupted and so on. But I think the public opinion now is very much against it.
Respectfully, and I'm sorry to do this, but let me interrupt you because we now have the translation for the UN Secretary General. Let's listen in.
And Rafah crossing board are the only lifeline to those in Gaza Strip. For Egypt once again proves that it is a pillar of peace and security in the region. It is the only country capable of defusing violence. The longer the war, the more the violence will become. And consequently, the more losses there will be in human life and property. We are demanding an immediate ceasefire and the quick and swift delivery of relief aid. I will put this humanitarian mission into effect from now and from Egypt. We shouldn't lose sight that we are all anticipating and looking forward to a long-lasting, permanent and final solution with the establishment of as a dependent Palestinian state side by side with Israel.
Okay, we've just been listening to Antonio Guterres. He's calling on Hamas to release hostages. He's calling on Israel to give unrestricted access to aid into Gaza. He is calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. Again, that's his new position. It wasn't his position for the first 10 days of the conflict, but it is as of, I think, 48 hours ago. And he says that Gaza needs aid at a scale and on a sustained basis. What do you make of the position of the UN since the beginning of this conflict?
I must say it was disappointing in the sense no one knows Gaza more than the UN. The UN has been in Gaza for 75 years, so they know exactly the situation. He does know very well, Guterres, that this did not start on the 7th of October. This has a long history. The UN itself has been the victim of Israeli attacks many times over the years. So all he does really, he's trying to put it within an acceptable framework for the superpowers, and that's basically the United States and Britain and France at the moment. So he's trying to walk a tightrope between satisfying them and their protection of Israel, which he fully understands that Israel enjoys an exceptionalism that no other state has in the world. He has the longest history of engagement as the UN with the Israelis, understand exactly the qualities Israel enjoys as the spoiled child of the West. Now, within that, he has to come up with statements. I think upgrading to a ceasefire is a better call than initially humanitarian corridors. But ultimately, he'd be lucky if Israel allows in humanitarian corridors in a systematic and safe ways.
How does he have any leverage over what's about to happen? Aid going in, the trucks going in from Egypt into the Gaza Strip, and the conditions that are put on those trucks, how much aid, what aid can be in those trucks, etc. Does he have a say in that?
Not at this stage. I mean, the UN has the infrastructure and can deliver aid and can guarantee for Israel that this aid will not make it into the hands of Hamas and will not include any weapons. And this is not the first time. They've done it many times before, and they've done it all over the world. But at the moment, the convoy that we see ready to go into Gaza is a token.
20 trucks for 2.2 million people.
20 trucks for yes, it's nothing. It is not a United Nations aid. This is mostly from Egypt. It's a token to show Egypt is doing its part. It's a token to show that Biden didn't travel on Air Force One all that distance and back for nothing. So he's done something. And it is also a way to show that the Israelis still have a space in their heart to look after these people. But we all know that the 20 trucks are not sufficient, just to supply the hospitals. Never mind the ones that were damaged, the ones that are still running. You need much more than that on a daily basis.
Yeah, you don't need to be an expert to know that you can't feed 2 million people with 20 trucks. You can't give drinking water to 2 million people.
They don't have food. Food would have spoiled by now. These have been trucks that have been there for about 10 days.
So this is for hospital equipment.
Mostly we will probably have medical equipment and hygiene kits to help limit the spread of diseases. This is the next thing that is coming to hit Gaza. There will be a spread of epidemics across the area, largely because of failing of sewer system. Without electricity, there's no way to pump the sewers, and this will now come to haunt everyone, aside from the fact that there is no fresh water available to the people of Gaza.
Sultan Barakat, thank you very much for joining us this hour. Appreciate your context and analysis. Israeli airstrikes have targeted areas close to villages in southern Lebanon. Missiles were fired at Hezbollah positions near Kafr Shuba. Israel has evacuated towns along the border with Lebanon after repeated exchanges of fire. Zaina Khoda reports from southern Lebanon.
Israel's military says it's targeting Hezbollah positions across the border in Lebanon. It's facing a guerrilla war. The Iranian-backed Lebanese armed group has been attacking Israeli military positions along the border, as well as tanks using precision-guided missiles. The warring sides have been trading fire along what has been an active front line since Israel started to attack Gaza more than a week ago. Hezbollah joined the battle after a call by its ally Hamas, but it's very much limiting its response within the rules of engagement established since its last war with Israel in 2006. Israel says it doesn't want to be dragged into war on a second front, but it has threatened to respond forcefully if attacked.
To engage Hezbollah in a full-scale war, it's a very risky thing. It is not
popular among the Lebanese population first, and it has to have a green light from the Iranian regime, because that might create a new dynamics in the Middle East altogether. So a decision of that scale, it has to be cleared by both the Iranian leadership and maybe the Syrians as well.
Hezbollah has said it's not neutral in the conflict. Its backer Iran has repeatedly warned of a war that would engulf the whole region if attacks against Gaza continue. But the so-called axis of resistance hasn't said what their red line is, except that Gaza will not fall. In other words, Hamas will not fall. A decision by Hezbollah to enter the war with its full military capabilities could depend on how long its ally can sustain Israeli attacks on its own. Iran and its allies across the region are now focusing their anger on the U.S. administration. They say it has given Israel free rein to carry out war crimes against the Palestinians. Since then, there have been reports of attacks on the U.S. military presence in Iraq and Syria.
And it exerts on the Americans additional pressure to tell them that, if this war happens, it will not be in any way a conventional war. It will have no limits, no borders, and attacks on Israel and its backers can be from anywhere.
For the time being, there is heated rhetoric while all sides appear to be weighing the risks and benefits of confrontation. But what appears to be shaping up is a protracted cross-border war of attrition. Zana Khuder, Al Jazeera, Southern Lebanon.
Al Jazeera's Ali Hashem joins us from Nakora in southern Lebanon. Even as we keep an eye, screen left, on the scenes at the Israel-Lebanon border where fires seem to be burning. Let's see if we can get any information on that with Ali. Ali, I don't know if you're in the vicinity of what I'm seeing, but what are you learning about what's happening at the border right now?
Well, the border is on fire since this afternoon. Several attacks has been launched in different sectors, from the east to the west. Now, we are here on the western sector on the Mediterranean. To the other side, the eastern sector is on the border with Syria and, of course, Israel. So there have been several attacks. Just behind me, a few hours ago, a couple of hours ago, the Israeli posts here, positions here, were hit by anti-tank guided missiles from Hezbollah. In accordance, there were over 20 rockets that were launched by Hamas, the Palestinian group Hamas in Lebanon now, launching 20 rockets towards northern Israel. And also there was a barrage of rockets towards Kiryat Shmona to the east. Now we know that there are 3 people injured there. So a lot of attacks, a lot of tit for tat, and this also has been going on, as we know, for the past 10, 12 days. Yesterday or this morning, very early this morning, where we are, there were 2 airstrikes and there were loud explosions. Israeli airplanes hit Hezbollah targets here in this area, and also other targets towards the east. So the issue is that we are seeing more attacks on daily basis. Before, we used to see 1, 2, 3 attacks. Today, at least there are 5, 6 attacks. And now, with this different approach, given the rockets that hit a building in Kiryat Shmona and the reports coming from there that there are 3 people injured there, this is different. This is kind of changing the situation slightly. And actually, we've been watching the situation gradually escalating, but it seems that we are in a new phase. This is not the same phase that we witnessed at the first days. This is another phase. And there's something I would like to emphasize on. It seems also that Hezbollah, while attacking the Israeli posts on the borders, they are kind of concentrating on hitting some communication apparatuses and tools like cameras that are used to take the pictures for the whole borders. Also, communication tools that are used to intercept calls and this situation. So there are different objectives Hezbollah is putting in front of them, aside from the war in Gaza, aside from the idea of relieving Gaza from the pressure and trying to draw more reinforcements to the north. We can see now, after around 2 weeks or a bit less than that, from the beginning of these escalations and this war, till the moment the ground offensive hasn't started. And this was one of the objectives of Hezbollah, to prevent the ground offensive. And it seems till the moment the northern front is succeeding in kind of hurdling the ground offensive.
Ali, thank you very much for all of that, even as we keep an eye on the Lebanon-Israel border screen left. And I'll keep in mind what you said at the top of your explanation, that the Israel-Lebanon border is on fire. And it's true that since this conflict began on October 7th, this round of fighting, there has been tit-for-tat exchange of artillery fire, mortar fire, etc., coming from both sides of the border. And that's why we continue to keep a very close eye on what's happening there. So far, Israel signaling to, rather saying to Lebanon, warning them not to enter into a full-scale war. Hezbollah has stopped short of that. But every day you explain to us that the border area is becoming more and more volatile. Al Jazeera's Ali Hashem in Nakura, southern Lebanon. Thank you very much. Israeli forces killed 9 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank on Thursday. The military raided multiple locations, including Nur Shams refugee camp in Tul Karem. At least 74 Palestinians have now been killed in the occupied West Bank since October the 7th. Nida Ibrahim reports from Ramallah.
For the first time in years, a Palestinian refugee camp is under Israeli curfew. A raid that began in the early hours of Thursday in Nur Shams near Tul Karim in the north of the occupied West Bank is showing no signs of ending. Israeli forces have declared the area a closed military zone, bulldozing roads, cutting off water and electricity, and turning homes into military posts. This video was filmed in the first hours of the raid. 16-year-old Taham Hamid is shot. His father tries to help him. He too is shot. The father was evacuated. The son bled to death.
Okay, thanks. We've been watching Al Jazeera and seeing all the carnage and the genocide, the Israeli genocide backed by the West that's going on in Gaza, and the killing on the West Bank from the IDF of civilians. 9 civilians, 9 people killed today in the West Bank. No Hamas in the West Bank. There's no Hamas in the West Bank. But they continue to kill people in the West Bank because they're waging a war on Palestinians, using Hamas as an excuse. Because they were killing, before October 7th, they were killing Palestinians and waging a war on Palestinians and occupying the Palestinians. These people, these Zionists, are very difficult to deal with because they have their own set of facts, their own set of reality. They're different. They're difficult to argue with, debate with, because they don't see facts. They very often will use ad hominem. That's what my experience has been over the years. That the Zionists, not Jewish, not Judaism, the Zionists, if they happen to be Jewish, they call themselves Jewish, But I'm talking about the political ideology. I leave the religion alone. I leave anyone's religion alone. I have my own religion that I believe is the truth. I believe there's points of truth in all religions, and the religions intersect, but that's beside the point. We're dealing with a political ideology here that was born in 1896 with a plan to mastermind a plot to justify another human being's suffering, another human being, an entire people's displacement. And you hear some of these Israeli politicians, these ministers, talking about referring to Palestinians as animals, referring to that the job wasn't finished in 1948 and that they should have pushed all the Palestinians out. They sound like Nazis. They sound like literal Nazis. I know that word is thrown around. There are literal Nazis in Ukraine, neo-Nazis, but these politicians sound like Nazis. And what they're doing in Gaza, genocide, ethnic cleansing, is fascist. And the Holocaust survivors and their descendants, if they keep this up, they will forever be known as the perpetrators of the Palestinian Holocaust. They will forever be known. The Zionists like to play victim. They like to play the victim card. And it was the Germans that killed 6 million Jews. The Germans, not the Palestinians. Not the Palestinians. And they like to play the Holocaust card to cover Israel's crimes. To cover Israel's crimes that have been constant over decades and decades. And now you're just seeing flat-out genocide, flat-out ethnic cleansing. 1,500 children have died. How would you feel if a militant group, there was a political issue and a militant group attacked the enemy, and you were sitting in San Diego, New York, London, or Paris, and the opposition, this is a hypothetical, put a siege on you where you don't have any water, medicine, food, fuel, electricity, and then bombed you repeatedly over and over. 8,000, well, it was 6,000 days ago, and it must be around 7,000 or 8,000 bombs that have fallen on one of the most densely packed, populated areas on planet Earth. Anybody defending the actions of the state of Israel right now is defending a genocide. There's no if, buts, or buts about it. They're defending a genocide. It doesn't take an international lawyer, a doctor of philosophy, a rocket scientist. It doesn't take any of that to look at the pictures and see what is going on is grossly illegal, is unjust and immoral. And all the people that thought Netanyahu was so bad in a few weeks ago, when I told you, Netanyahu, if you got rid of the occupation and people like that, you wouldn't have a democracy deficit in Israel. You wouldn't have a problem where people are protesting about the court system. You wouldn't have an issue because people like that wouldn't come to power. You would have got rid of that vile, putrid philosophy, that racism, that prejudice. That Zionist philosophy, Zionism, the United Nations said, is a form of racism. And that stood for 16 years until the United States, after the fall of the Soviet Union, got the UN General Assembly to revoke it. But it stood for 16 years, and it's absolutely correct. Mandela stood next to Palestinian freedom fighters. He called them his brother in arms. And you know that what Mandela was on the U.S. State Department's terrorist list all the way up until 2008. I hope most people know that, but if you don't know that, now you know. The U.S. sided with apartheid South Africa, put Mandela on the terrorist list, State Department, and he stayed put until 2008. If you want to believe the baloney that the United States and Europe stand for democracy and human rights, then I got a bridge to sell you. I got a giant, nice bridge to sell you. You can contact me, drop me a message. I will sell you that bridge. But, I'm not dishonest. I'm not going to sell you a bridge because unlike these people in power, I'm not dishonest. I don't lie like the Israeli military. I don't lie like the Israeli state. I don't lie like the U.S. government. My country, by the way, I'm American if you don't know. My country, which is my government, which I do not support either party because they are both facilitating genocide. And I don't believe in genocide, obviously. And apparently, there are a lot of people in the West that believe in genocide and believe in ethnic cleansing and believe in crimes against humanity. As long as it's their ally doing it, and it's brown people that are on the receiving end of it, and Muslims on the receiving end of it, then ethnic cleansing and genocide is just great and dandy for the European Union, for the U.S. administration, as they try to put out a couple of tokens, some humanitarian aid, 20 trucks here, but keep the siege on. They should be screaming from their capitals, lift the siege on innocent civilians. But they're not, because they're party to it. Those weapons, those bombs that are killing Palestinian children right now, those are American weapons. Those are American weapons. Funding that Europeans give to Israel, that's going to genocide. So it's on you, Biden, U.S. Congress, von der Leyen, Sunak, Schultz, Macron, Maloney. It's on you. This is your genocide. You're genocidal facilitating states. I don't care what your media spins and your governmental apparatus spins. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at the pictures of what's happening, look at the statistics of what's happening, and look at the statements coming out of Tel Aviv, coming out of the Israeli government to know what is happening. You are genocidal facilitating governments. And you need to, for the sake of the people in Gaza, stop it and change course right now. And whether or not the ICC, which is a tool, apparently a tool of Western governments, sitting there in The Hague, in the Netherlands, we don't see these images coming out of anywhere near anything like that coming out of Ukraine, where the West backed neo-Nazis to kill 15,000 people. We saw those coming out, and then instigating a war with Russia, which is a war, a bloody war, but we didn't see a siege on civilian people. Russia may have targeted the energy infrastructure for military purposes or for whatever purpose. They may have targeted energy, but people in Ukraine, in Kiev, still had energy. They still had water. They still had food. The people were still going to bars. They were giving reports about people going to bars and nightclubs in Kiev. You think anybody's going to a bar and a nightclub in Gaza right now? They don't know if they're going to be alive in 5 minutes and 2 minutes. And yet this Western media apparatus and political apparatus were throwing up every time an errant missile hit an apartment building, and tragic. Any civilian killed in war is a tragedy. And I don't like anybody being killed. I think 2,000 years from now, maybe people will look at war and hopefully say, they actually went to war. People actually killed each other on that scale. They killed each other, and didn't they know that Jesus said, "Turn the other cheek," and that it said, "Thou shalt not kill." They actually killed each other. So yeah, I would like to see that. But right now we have Western governments living on, and we have to analyze the root causes. And the fact is, in Ukraine, they instigated this with a coup, and they instigated a violent conflict that led to a reaction from a powerful state. And they wanted to turn that powerful state, throw every sanction in the book at them to turn that state into a pariah. And not too long after, they're facilitating genocide, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity, and shrugging their shoulders. And shrugging their shoulders. I'll say it again, and shrugging their shoulders. What do you do with international law? I mean, I've studied international relations, obviously, my specialization, international relations, international law, international humanitarian law, human rights law, the United Nations Charter, the Geneva Conventions, the different protocols, the International Criminal Court. What do you do with that when the people that constantly hold it up and talk about a rules-based order are sitting there time and time again just trampling the UN Charter, all these rules underfoot? And apparently, a lot of people in the West are just plain ignorant because they fall for it every time, because they want to think that their governments are so holy and good. You're not good when you kill 3 to 4 million people in Vietnam. You're not good when you say, oops, we killed 1 million in Iraq. Oops, there were no weapons of mass destruction. Sorry. I said it again. I'll say it again. This country should build a monument so large that you can't see the end of it. Build a church, a temple, a mosque, as an apology. Build a church to God, saying that we're sorry for the 1 million people we killed in Iraq. We're sorry for the people that were killed in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We're sorry for all the people we killed in Afghanistan, in Vietnam, and all the people being born with 3 legs and birth defects because they dropped chemical weapons on Vietnam. Where's the shrine? The I'm sorry. They just keep on doing the same thing over and over. Why is that? Take a look at the people they're killing. With the exception of Yugoslavia, which was illegal, and a peaceful solution existed at Rambouillet, the Rambouillet Accords, which I've talked about, I've written in my book. Everybody that they're killing are people of color. These are former colonial powers. France, Britain, Italy, Germany, not only tried to take over the world and destroy the earth. I don't know how. I mean, Germany should keep quiet. Shh. Keep quiet for the next 500 years. You have no place to even say anything, in my opinion. Keep quiet, Germany. Schultz, shh. No place to condemn anybody or say anything. Just shh, keep quiet. And glad you were allowed to keep a country, that you weren't dismantled after World War II, after what you did. Okay? Shh, Germany, quiet. You got no place in international affairs. Really, you shouldn't even be allowed to speak. And these countries are backing a genocide of a colonial outpost, a colonial settler state that they helped bring about and ethnically cleanse a people that were already there, that they deemed as the non-Jewish other. That's how they defined Palestinians that had been living for millennia, for living centuries and centuries on that land, as the non-Jewish other. Going back 106 years to the Balfour Declaration. British terrorized the Palestinians under the Mandate. And it got to a point where, the British actually wanted to keep control, but the Zionist terrorists who blew up hotels, literal terrorists blowing up hotels, terrorized the British and the area to the extent the British left. And then the U.S. took over sponsoring the Zionist project and the state of Israel. And it's a colonial outpost. It's a racist apartheid colonial outpost. You're going to push people that have lived there for centuries, the families off their land, build a wall right through their orchards. You're going to push them off their land. So somebody that was born in Austin, Texas, born in New York or Paris or Kiev or Russia or Sweden can emigrate to Israel and settle in the West Bank and push Palestinians off their land and attack them because of their religion, because you were born in Austin, Texas, and you say you're Jewish and you're a Jewish Zionist, that you can do that to another human being using the Bible as a land deed? No. This is going to come back to... this is going to blow back on Israel and on the United States and on Europe. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that the UN resolutions, international law, can't be implemented because they're all there. Resolution 242. 1967 borders. They're not only not rolling back settlements or stopping settlements in the West Bank to adhere to international law, Israel has been expanding settlements. And the best that the United States could muster, and probably the Obama administration, at the end of the administration or here and there, would be, don't build settlements. We're against it. And they do nothing about it. They don't sanction them. They don't revoke aid. They don't reduce aid. They don't do anything. They just let them continue to flout international law over and over and over, year after year, decade after decade. And I have to ask this over and over. Where on earth is their rules-based order? Where's their rules-based order? They've said this over and over, that Russia was trying to destroy the rules-based order. If you look at the history, Russia appears to have far more respect for any international rules than the United States and the Europeans. Name me a country that the Europeans left without a anti-colonial struggle. Every one of them that I can think of, they were kicked out of. The Soviet Union just decided to dissolve and left peacefully. Look what it took in Algeria to get the French out of Algeria. And even after they left, they tested nuclear weapons in the desert, spreading nuclear radiation all over. Just some Algerians. They're just going to radiate Algerians just like they irradiated the Polynesians in quote-unquote French Polynesia, Tahiti. What business does France have in Tahiti or in New Caledonia on the other side of the earth? No business. And they're still colonizing these countries. The Kanaki in New Caledonia don't want them there. They cheated on the French. We talked about this. Went forward with a referendum where the entire independence camp boycotted. They boycotted because they were mourning from the Delta variant of COVID that hit the Kanak people very hard. And so they asked for an extension so they could campaign in a normal fashion, and Paris said no. They said no. And then when there was a almost 50%, or actually a 56% abstention rate, I think the turnout was like 44%. Macron said, oh, there was a little bit of a turnout issue, but, New Caledonia has chosen to stay with France, and as if it was normal, if it was just normal. It's like playing a basketball game with yourself. That's dishonest. These are the countries that are backing Israel. These countries with massive PR and media machines that spread their rhetoric of human rights and democracy around the planet while they back genocide and ethnic cleansing. And this is not the first time that they're doing something that's abominable immorally and legally. Look at Iraq. Was there any accountability for Iraq? No weapons of mass destruction. Oops, killed 1 million people, destroyed your country. I remember running to the Archbishop of Baghdad at an ordination in California some years ago, about 10 years ago. And I was with my parents, and I remember my mom apologizing to him. I'm not apologizing, just saying sorry. We're so sorry. All that so tragedy that was visited upon Iraq. He had tears in his eyes, and he said, glassy eyes, and said, yeah, a lot of people were killed from the Christian community there, and the devastation from the diocese. So the U.S. not only killed Muslims, but all kinds of other people. Christians, Catholics. But they apparently think it's okay because a Muslim majority population is just doesn't carry the same human value, according to them, as Western whatever they are. They would, if that weren't true, they wouldn't be acting like this in Israel. I cannot imagine how they could be laying siege to Sweden or to any white population and bombing them nonstop and watching child after child be killed. I can't even hardly watch some of the images on Al Jazeera anymore because they're too upsetting. So here we have the United States, the European Union backing a genocide, an ethnic cleansing. And if you have any moral fiber in you, you're not standing with Israel, you're standing against what Israel is doing. People are being killed in the West Bank right now. They just killed 9 people in the West Bank. No Hamas in the West Bank. They killed 225 to 250 people in the West Bank this year before October 7th. No Hamas in the West Bank. None whatsoever. No Hamas. You got the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, who has been committed to nonviolence, using the tools of international law, going to the United Nations, trying to get statehood, UNESCO, UN General Assembly. I remember when I was an activist, and during this was in San Francisco, I was protesting the Israeli incursion during the Second Intifada. This has been going on for a long time, and there were people protesting before that during the First Intifada. But when I was an undergrad and I was organizing, I came across a friend, an old classmate from grammar school in the lounge. They were playing pool, and he was with another guy. this big heavy guy that I didn't know who he was, but I knew this guy from grammar school. And so I said, hey, how's it going, man? What's up? And I was handing out flyers. So he said, what's this? I said, well, I'm organizing a Free Palestinian protest, things like that. He said, okay. And so the guy with him was Jewish. I gotta say a Zionist based on his reaction. And he tried to started to get confrontational. And I said, hey, I believe Jews and Palestinians, Israelis and Palestinians all have the same value as human beings. An Israeli baby has the same exact value as a Palestinian baby. And this guy blew up. This guy, I remember it clearly, he got so mad, he said, no, an Israeli has way more value than a Palestinian. Way more. He couldn't compare it. An Israeli was superior to a Palestinian. You don't know how to react to somebody like that. They left right after that, and just remember my friend from grammar school turning and saying, I'm sorry, Paul. Sorry about that. Sorry. He was embarrassed. Sorry about that, Paul. And they left. That is the Zionist attitude. That is not an aberration. The Zionist attitude is superiority. Zionism equals racism. It is an attitude that these people are to be pushed out into the desert. Listen to the way they talk about pushing people, human beings, into the desert. We're talking about civilians, masses of civilians. And it's an ideology that is putrid and that is currently carrying out ethnic cleansing and genocide against the Palestinian people. And I'll say it again. If they don't change courses, the descendants of Holocaust survivors from Nazi Germany, the descendants of that horrible Holocaust that killed 6 million Jews, the descendants and actual survivors and their descendants will be the perpetrators and the purveyors and perpetrators of the Palestinian Holocaust. And that's what it is looking like right now. This is a genocide. It is ethnic cleansing, and the entire world needs to do whatever they can to get it to stop. Thanks so much for joining me here on Eye on Global Politics, on radio, on our streams. We've been streaming on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, giving LinkedIn a try, as well as on our mainstay of Eye on Global Politics Radio, eyeonglobalpolitics.com. So thanks so much, and as always, keep the faith. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Twitter feed, and until next time, as always, again, keep the faith.
You're tuned in to Eye on Global Politics Radio, coming at you live from the heart of Oregon's Willamette Valley, broadcasting around the world on eyeonglobalpolitics.com.